of Typography Society of India. It is a very proud moment for our organization to have the internationally acclaimed designer, educator, and researcher, Dr. Fiona Ross, with us today. It is my privilege and honor and a great pleasure to welcome her to the society. She will be talking on research-based practice in designing type for South Asian scripts. Dr. Ross will discuss a design methodology that advocates research-based practice to advance the possibilities for effective visual communication in writing systems beyond those that use the Latin script. Fiona specializes in type design and typography, primarily in Arabic, South Asian, and Thai scripts. She has a background in languages with a PhD in Indian Paleography, SOAS, London University. Fiona is a part-time faculty member of the Department of Typography and Graphic Communication at the University of Reading in the UK, where she is a professor in type design. She was the head of the Department of Typographic Development at Linotype. Fiona has designed several typefaces in Indian languages, including Bengali, Devanagari, Gujarati, Malayalam, etc. Her typefaces are considered to be landmarks in the history of Indian typography. For example, Dr. Rose's famous Malayalam font, Panchari, released in the 70s, is still the most popular body copy font in Malayalam, extensively used in traditional as well as new media. Fiona works as a consultant, type designer, author, and lecturer. Her recent design work has been in collaboration with Tom Holloway, John Hudson, and Nilakant Shethimayum for clients such as Anandabasar Patrika, Adobe, Google, Microsoft, Monotype, and Harvard University Press for the Murty Classical Library of India. Dr. Ross is the recipient of the SOTA Typography Award and the Type Directors Club Medal for her outstanding work in type design and education. On behalf of the organizing committee and the Typography Society, I extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Fiona Ross. Namaste. Over to you, Dr. Ross.
Hello. I feel deeply honoured to have been invited to present to the Typography Society of India, and I would particularly like to thank Professor Sri Kumar for inviting me. Today I would like to discuss a design methodology in the field of typeface design based upon my experience as a researcher, practitioner and educator. A design methodology that advocates research-based practice to advance the possibilities for effective visual communication. Unlike perhaps a number of you who might be viewing this, and Mutu Nedumaran, who gave the previous fascinating talk, I have never undertaken Latin typography or Latin type design. My field is principally South Asian, Arabic, and Thai type development, and it is from this perspective, and particularly South Asian scripts, that I shall be looking at type design issues today, but much of the discussion is of course relevant to all scripts. I do not come from a design background, but a languages and research background, studying Sanskrit with Pali and with a PhD in Indian Paleography from SOAS, that is the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is part of London University. My work time is mainly divided between working at the University of Reading, part-time on teaching, and on research activities as curator of the non-Latin type collection. I have also taught and given lectures and workshops elsewhere in the world, here, as you see here in Switzerland. And then other days of the week, I work from home in Gloucestershire on design work and my writings. And as long as the internet is working, I collaborate with people in different continents. And as you can imagine, since the coronavirus pandemic, I've been working from home. So if you hear a dog barking or the cows lowing, you will know why. Well, my family background is not English, but multicultural. And there have always been items in different scripts from different cultures at home and wherever I've lived. And this is a detail from one of my father's manuscripts. Well, my venture into type design stemmed from my love of Indian literature. I studied Sanskrit and Pali in order to be able to read texts in the original languages and not through Rudyard Kipling or Hermann Hesse's reworkings in English or German. And I was also aware that the beauty of the literature, such as Kalidas's Meghaduta, was matched by the beauty of the Indian scripts. Yet I noticed that such beauty was not as a rule reflected in the quality of the publication's typography. And I think we can all agree that the importance of visual communication and therefore typographic design cannot be overestimated. It is essential for the successful dissemination of ideas and information, and remains as crucially important today as when Emperor Ashoka's rock edicts were carved in the 3rd century BCE. And we are aware that scripts serve as vital tools for all manner of textual communication, even in areas where there's been a long-standing oral tradition, as in many parts of South Asia. And I think it's useful to situate these topics in context by reflecting that most of the world uses writing systems other than Latin, but most typeface designs so far have been created for the Latin script. Yet we know that printing in Asian scripts predates that in Latin, not only by means of xylography, but also by movable type in East Asia. Metal type is also known to have been successfully produced in Korea in the 13th century, so predating Gutenberg. And this is an image from the world's earliest known complete and dated printed book, which is in Chinese. Well, today I'm narrowing the focus to the scripts of South Asia, which provide a visible voice to over 1/5 of the world's population, and particularly to those of the Indian subcontinent, which, according to reliable sources, enjoys the use of some 780 different languages and 68 scripts employed by many millions, or rather hundreds of millions, as shown here. And for those of us who are engaged in type design, and even multi-script type design, it is useful to note that even when pared down to a UI font, these scripts, which demonstrate great visual diversity, also show some affinity to each other on account of their common derivation from the Brahmi script. And this diversity and affinity is evident here with actual words, or at least typeface names. This list shows one weight of the first digital South Asian fonts created during the early 1980s at Linotype UK under my watch, with a drawing office staffed for many years only by women. It says 1990, but they began at the early and then into the late 1980s. So this work, in close collaboration with our overseas colleagues in South Asia, contributed to the reading experience of millions of readers, as during the last 2 decades of the 20th century, with these fonts, Linotype had 90% of the Indian vernacular newspaper market. Now, we had thought that this development of digital fonts in the 1980s would immediately give rise to a panoply of new, original, creative designs, but regrettably, this has hardly been the case. These typefaces are still in use today, albeit often in cloned form, which perhaps highlights the fact that in the 21st century, there remains a recognized paucity of fonts to serve the needs of many linguistic communities, especially in comparison to Latin, in terms of the range and the quality of designs available in usable font formats. This is evidenced by the example of these 4 daily Bengali newspapers from Kolkata. And although this image doesn't show the most recent editions, the point is still valid. They all use the same body text face, that is Linotype Bengali, usually called ABP Bengali. This ABP, that is Anand Bazar Patrika, are the only ones to license it, and their newspaper is shown top left here. Now in 2019, one community was still waiting on a font that could send SMS text messages by phone in the Métis Marc script. Now, new developments have rectified this, but there remain issues regarding input methods, a lack of well-designed fonts for some scripts, or even a dearth of fonts that are Unicode compatible to represent some languages. However, we are indeed on the cusp of improved global textual communication as we witness current efforts impelled by internationalization and facilitated by existing and emerging technologies. Well, my concern is principally for text typefaces, particularly for sustained reading. So this differs from the informal styles that Murty was showing earlier this month. So how does my contention that sound research underpins best practice in vernacular type design actually function in practice to deliver effective means of typographic communication? Well, I hope to demonstrate this by showing you a few design projects that span well over 30 years. Clearly, an understanding of the writing system is essential when embarking on any design, but it is in researching revered manuscripts, noteworthy inscriptions, and analysing past and current practices in typefounding, typographic conventions, script requirements, as well as cultural traditions that help us make intelligent decisions and contribute to best practice, whether it be for Devanagari, Arabic, Latin, or Tibetan, etc. The designer can develop his or her visual perceptual skills, approaching scripts and resources without preconceptions. And I use this character as a reminder to students that they shouldn't look for equivalents in the Latin script, as demonstrated by this numeral 3 in the Kannada script. Regarding a few real projects that illustrate how research underpinned the design process. Archival research had formed the basis of my first design project in 1978, namely Linotype Bengali for the already mentioned renowned Kolkata newspaper and publishing house Ananda Pasar Patrika, ABP. As you will know, ABP has a long history of Bengali publishing and was instrumental in implementing the Bengali script on the hot metal linotype machine, a machine that was preferred for newspaper composition. And in this image, in the top here, the British linotype factory can be seen in the background with linotype machines destined for Kolkata. For 40 years, ABP's daily Bengali newspaper was constrained by the linotype's reduced character set, shown here, that comprised around 100 source rather than the customary 510 of foundry type. Furthermore, the light and the bold characters had to share the same widths, as you could possibly gather from this diagram, or this font synopsis. Furthermore, the technology would not permit kerning, so vowel signs were displaced, as we can see, and we will see further. But crucially, it did enable the wide dissemination of information through newspaper publishing. And in 1978, upon ABP's decision to transfer from hot metal directly to digital technology, so bypassing film setting, a long correspondence and then association with ABP followed. And I was assisted by Dr. Tarapada Mukherjee, my then PhD tutor at SOAS, and the artwork was created by the supremely talented type designer, Tim Holloway. Well, under Mukherjee's guidance, I therefore consulted manuscripts and early printed works to comprehend how the beautiful Bengali script had become fixed in type by the earliest publications that had deliberately simplified the Bengali script and introduced word spacing and other typographic conventions. So on the right, you see the earliest successful Bengali font, and on the left, you see one of the manuscripts that we know the font's creators had sight of. We looked at slightly later well-drawn historical models, such as these types based on letter forms of the Bengali writing master Kali Kumara Raya, and we consulted font synopses of foundry type previously used by ABP. And we were intent on redressing the clumsy forms created by the restrictions of the hot metal linotype machine that had become the daily experience encountered by newspaper readers for 4 decades, and whose legacy is still visible in contemporary practice. So this newspaper headline shows the lack of kerning and characters constructed by ill-fitting components that should have a seamless join. As shown here, where the green circles indicate where there should be kerning, and the red circle, seamless joining. So we decided to stretch the possibilities of kerning vowel signs afforded by digital typesetters by kerning in both directions, as the word pretty here requires. And at Linotype, we worked with programmers to develop software that allowed the accurate placement of vowel signs for digital fonts, as you can see here. Remember, these are the days long before OpenType features. And we created new solutions for keyboarding, and ABP were the first to adopt the phonetic keyboard that we invented at Linotype, which enabled the keying of contextual forms, that is, conjuncts and ligatures, vowel signs, for Indian and later other South Asian scripts. And importantly, it enabled the use of standard keyboard hardware. The phonetic keyboard also no longer constrained character set sizes. In other words, technology first developed in 1978 greatly influenced and facilitated Indian script typeface design. Consequently, it enabled the reintroduction of letter shapes, especially conjuncts, that had not been seen in newspapers for some 40 years. And you see a small selection from here. And ABP, true to their enduring pioneering spirit, felt that the benefits of the new Bengali design for newspaper composition overcame any necessity to acquiesce to reader conservatism. There is a slight error here in this trial setting, but you can see that the resulting design, which first saw publication in 1982, provided economies of space in comparison to the earlier pop metal rendition. And also it enabled the creation of new standards of typography. Furthermore, it established the design process for other fonts we undertook at Linotype, at first specifically for the Indian Express group of Mr. Ramnath Goenka, who regretted he did not lead Linotype Bengali, but required many other scripts designed to the same standard. Other newspaper clients for these typefaces included the Times of India, Malaya Manorama, Inadu, and others. Well, returning briefly to Bengali digital type development, despite vociferous initial complaints regarding the seemingly retrogressive reintroduction of manuscript letter forms, the Linotype Bengali typeface has become ubiquitous for Bengali composition in India and Bangladesh. Linotype Bengali, or rather ABP Bengali, has been described by one scholar as the Times and Helvetica of West Bengal. Well, on visiting the ABP offices in 2008 in Calcutta, long after I'd ceased working at Linotype, the then chief editor, Avik Sarkar, pointed out ABP's long-felt need of over 30 years for more typefaces than just one in two weights. They wanted the additional extra bold weight they had requested from Linotype back in the early 1980s that never came to fruition. But they urgently needed a new voice, a low-contrast typeface for differentiation and for the launch of a new daily metro newspaper, Ibella. Therefore, the kind of research materials that we have just had a glimpse of in turn underpin the development of the low-contrast Sarkar typeface in open type format for ABP. We had developed a common language to discuss issues across continents with the newspaper editors who kept us abreast of evolving language requirements. Well, for this project, Tim and I needed to work with large drawing sizes, and we drew inspiration again from a range of resources to overcome problems that the chief editor had identified in existing low-contrast designs, which he had found unsuitable, such as these. In fact, Avik Sarkar suggested that the problem we needed to deal with when designing a low-contrast Bengali typeface was that of, I quote, having too many tenants in the attic. And we experimented with how to prevent essence clashing using methods that we had observed in manuscripts held at the British Library. For some trompe-l'oeil and other effects documented here, I obtained the chief editor's approval during another visit to Calcutta. We also angled subscripts so that the bold weight did not sit too deep and demanded too much, and that it would not demand too much leading for newspaper setting. And you can perhaps get a better idea from these Font Lab images of these angled attachments. We conducted the usual trials and testing and delivered just in time for the launch on the 31st of August 2012. So ABP and their publications now had two typefaces designed some 30 years apart by the same team, with the additional assistance of Nilakash Ketrimayum towards the end of the project. And following a commission from Arup Sarkar in December 2015, with Nilakash working in India, me working in the UK, with John Hudson of Tara Typeworks undertaking production in Canada, we delivered the extra bold font some 30 years late, but in time for ABP's chief editor's 70th birthday. And it first appeared on the newspaper stands in Kolkata in December 2015. This is the first edition that used it. And we have continued in recent years to design more typefaces to afford different voices for the newspaper, like this one shown here as a heading and drop initial, as well as the body copy and the cultural pages of the Nanda Bazar Patrika newspaper, which, according to recent figures, continues to be the most read daily Bengali newspaper. And this typeface, ABP 2015, which never lost its working name, is shown again here in a spread, which I believe demonstrates typographic excellence. No matter how well designed or executed a typeface can be, it depends on its user to reveal its qualities. Incidentally, it is heartening to see that printed newspapers continue to flourish in South Asia, although in the time of this coronavirus pandemic, there have been difficulties. Well, my 40-year relationship with ABP led to a recent request to work with Saffron Brown Consultants in designing with Neelakash the new identity logos and taglines for the ABP network channels across a number of scripts. And this research-based design methodology has been responsible for other projects. The project Adobe Devanagari comprises another research-driven project. It commenced in 2005 and was designed in collaboration with Tim Holloway and with assistance in production by John Hudson again. And it relied on research for information and inspiration to fulfill the brief of designing for screen as well as print to answer business needs. I was already fully conversant with the history of Devanagari types, such as the foundry types shown here, and had a complete understanding of the standard techniques for Devanagari hand composition, as well as the constraints of the hot metal Devanagari renditions, which were slightly better than those of Bengali. And also, I was aware of the few Devanagari film setting attempts. My studies had informed the development of the Linotype Devanagari digital fonts, whose original letter forms were designed by Matthew Carter for film setting, based on Nenaya Saga types shown in Bapurai S. Naik's book. Now, although with Matthew and my team, we revised a number of characters for digital typesetting, and we added some 200 glyphs. Incidentally, I feel very fortunate to have met Bapurai Naik in my early days at Linotype. As in Linotype Devanagari, we were keen to follow the stroke modulation of the Indian pen for the Adobe Devanagari. This, as you well know, is the reverse of the Latin pen, whereby the strokes thicken when bolds meet the vertical strokes. Following this convention is essential to readability, and particularly for immersive reading, as it can be seen if the Latin is reversed using the Indian pen. Being familiar with different imprints spanning over 2 centuries of notable Sanskrit texts was helpful at a later stage of the project to establish which Sanskrit forms should be included for this and other projects. The Sanskrit forms are those on the right, which are also preferred for Nepali. And the analysis of authoritative manuscripts enabled us to determine the precise positioning of marks, a facility now embedded in all OpenType fonts. And therefore the Anuswara, as you can see here and here, need not be confined to being situated over the right vertical stems, as the limitations of many software programs had previously dictated, and to which many readers became accustomed. And this below is a partial test which runs to some 50 pages at each weight. Well, the removal of character set restrictions enabled the careful design of fully integrated conjuncts, of which this is just a selection. So to summarize, our research of past lettering and composing practices informed our use of type design and development tools to answer the brief set by Adobe. The resulting font, which covers another number of languages with this script, comprises some 800 glyphs in each weight. As usual, the font is not always used as intended. It has also been used in political campaigns, but I've deliberately refrained from showing them here. Excuse me. As I mentioned, we were keen to observe the stroke modulation of Indian penmanship in new original designs. And here you can see how the lettering trials fed into the final design. And the typical North Indian stroke modulation needs to be observed even in low contrast designs, which are seemingly monolinear. We were keen to avoid Latinization that was evident in some fonts. And our answer in the 1980s had been this typeface Rohini, which over 2 decades later informed the Nirmala UI design commissioned by Microsoft. And here you can see within the same font the difference, the stroke modulation of the Devanagari and the Latin. Here, and here, and here, and here. The removal of constraints on font file sizes means that all language variations may, if required, be housed within one font and be accessible by means of language tags. And each Nirmala UI font of now modern 10 scripts contains over 4,000 glyphs. So of course, this is just part of the font. So the final project I'd like to mention is that commissioned by Harvard University Press for the Murty Classical Library of India, MCLI, funded by Dr. Rohan Murty. It is a truly transcontinental project and one that is near to my heart, as it was Indian literature that first brought me into the field of typography and type design. Well, for MCLI, which was to be an ever-expanding series of volumes of face-in-page translations, John Hudson and I were commissioned to design a set of custom Indian script typefaces. And Dr. Ratna Ramnathan was commissioned to design the interior of each volume. The brief, in essence, was to undertake a contemporary approach to traditional type forms, but bearing in mind that the typefaces were to represent classical Indian texts, they needed to be appropriate in style for approval by literary scholars, and yet appeal to the modern young Indian reader. Now, the range of scripts was broad, but did not include any with which we were not already familiar. And happily, a number of the proposed classical texts were also well known to me and to Ratna. Well, all scripts raised interesting issues during their design, and for the sake of brevity, I will highlight just one aspect that relates to 2 designs, that of stroke modulation. The first being in relation to the design for the Punjabi text in the Gurmukhi script. Now, Gurmukhi has a small character set, but the challenge was to develop a style that was in keeping with the designs for the other scripts, such as Devanagari, and in harmony with the facing page English translation. In Punjabi typography, in the Gurmukhi script, the preference since the mid-20th century has been for low contrast typefaces, as you see here, even for the printing of devotional literature, as well as newspaper publications. However, such a style was out of keeping with our brief. We therefore felt it important to consult the original manuscript tradition to assist us in developing a new approach to Gurmukhi typeface design. We were extremely fortunate in being able to access the Punjabi manuscripts in the British Library through the curator, Dr. Marina Cellini, and also to have the advice of Professor Shackle, the translator of the first volume, and whom I'd known from my SOAS university days. Well, under their expert guidance, we were able to analyse the different styles that were apparent, evidently from different scribal traditions that had influence in the Punjab. And the manuscript that took our breath away and was the most informative was the prayer book of Rani Jindal. This informed the construction of the letter forms and the stroke modulation. And you can see a page of this here. I cannot show you details as this is a devotional text, and I'm not allowed to zoom in or crop it, but the British Library have allowed me to show it to you. Professor Shackle kindly provided feedback as the typeface developed and advised on the development of particular stylistic sets to prevent clashes of ascenders with superior marks. Of course, the final image of any typeface is mediated by the typographer, the user. Guided by Ratna's experience, together we worked on testing some of the more challenging aspects of textual composition. In fact, all of us, being obsessed with details, we undertook seemingly endless tests with the final text to obtain the best results possible with a software in which John spent considerable time pushing to its limits to deliver the hopeful typography. And we were pleased that upon publication of the first book in each of these Indian script typefaces, the fonts are freely available for non-commercial use. Well, with respect to the Kannada typeface undertaken a few years later, the design took us on a different journey. We were familiar with the manuscript tradition for this and other Indian scripts, South Indian scripts, of the use of the stylus on palm leaf that created monolinear letter forms. And we were fully aware of the preferred high contrast design favoured in typography. We were familiar with the hot metal type, as shown in this newspaper clipping, but we were more interested in researching early 19th century very readable type of the Basel Mission Press, and also those produced by the Gujarat Type Foundry during the 1930s. Now, my experience with digital type development for linotype made me aware that these did possess antiquated forms that should be avoided, such as these here. And I was mindful of a crucial decision we had made for the early digital fonts in the 80s, and the issues we'd experienced in trying to draw for dynamic effect a gently rising, where's my mouse? Gently rising horizontal top line, which was impossible to render smoothly in early digital type, so we just had to straighten it. So we decided against reintroducing this rising stroke, as there were other elements that imbue vitality to the design for the Murty Kannada. And with regard to the overall stroke modulation, we also decided to avoid the extreme high contrast that is witnessed in some publications in order to maintain harmony with the other designs, but to also ensure optimum readability for the text. It was a truly collaborative venture, and we benefited greatly from the expertise and information provided to us by Harvard University Press, who also provided us with feedback from the editorial board, the compositors, and the translators. And we are delighted with the reception this project has so far received. For me, it was a privilege to be working with Ratna, the book's designer, as our priority was that the typography should reflect the beauty of its literary content. Now, clearly the intended purpose of a typeface design, its intended users and readership are fundamental to finding the appropriate voice and therefore its styling. To consider whether typeface will be used for a specific genre, in an extensive or limited range of type styles and sizes, whether for print and screen, whether it was a UI or default font on the mobile device, is crucial to the design process in any script. And of course, as we saw earlier, one can never anticipate how a typeface might also be used, particularly when the choice of fonts is poor. We may design for 8-point newsprint, but find it used on the side of a pink van or for posters around town. As you can see by the camera shake, Neil nearly got run over trying to take an image of a poster in situ. Personally, I do not really like to discuss my work in public, but I realise that documenting in some ways such case studies which allow future practitioners to comprehend how design decisions are being made that affect the visual representation of language is informative. And I am concerned that in the digital age, reflections on design practice that we request from our students at Reading, as shown here, are unfrequently undocumented. Iterations and early samples of design, as shown here, are easily deleted and rarely preserved for future researchers and designers. Reliable resources in this field, such as these, by former students, Neil and Kalapi, both published and unpublished, are, I'm delighted to say, growing in number. And there is an increasing number of models of good design practice that do see publication, such as this by Vaibhav Singh and this by Kalapi Gajja and others. Personally speaking, it's wonderful to work with former students as colleagues, and I do feel fortunate that they are happy to work with me on different projects and in different capacities. But reliable resources such as these are still scarce, which is why the use of diverse sources, both primary and secondary, within and out with the discipline of typeface design is essential to inform and inspire best practice. Here, for instance, we find an example of hand-painted lettering on the side of a bust in Calcutta. And these letter forms seem to indicate movement, even though the bus is stationary amidst the usual heavy traffic. I would like to conclude by saying that I hope I've shown today why I am keen to advocate a research-based design methodology, one which, through continued analysis and re-evaluation of past and existing practices, can utilize the latest digital tools to enhance textual communication, particularly for South Asian writing systems. Thank you. And many thanks to those who contributed images and ideas for this. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Fiona, for the wonderful talk and for accepting our invitation. We will move on to the Q&A session now.
Hello.
Hi, good evening.
The dog out of the room.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. We will start with the. Thank you very much, Fiona, for the wonderful talk and for accepting our invitation. We will move on to the Q&A session now.
Very good.
So, I will start with some of the questions I have. Good evening.
Dog out of the room.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. We will start with the. Thank you very much. Digital technology has changed, has gone through a metamorphosis over the last maybe around 25 years, especially after the Macintosh came and a lot of new softwares came. Before that, there was a very different scene. So, would you please share some of your experience and your viewpoint on this? You know, the method of designing a font has changed considerably before digital technology and after. And now there are so many softwares available for font designers to work on. So you have seen both the pre-digital technology era and the new one. So would you please share some of your experiences and your viewpoints on this?
Yes, I was actually reflecting on this yesterday. Please tell me if you can't hear me properly. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you properly.
I hope so. I was reflecting on this yesterday because I was thinking that that during my time when I started at Linotype, there were very limited possibilities for type design, because if you were a type designer, and there were very few who call themselves type designers,
Yeah.
then what happened was that really you wouldn't see any production. You wouldn't see your font actually produced unless you were tied to a particular, engineering company such as Linotype, a foundry, and Monotype. And then also the big difference there was that unless you were employed by them, really what happened was that you might get your designs realized, but unless you were a big name, you wouldn't have your name mentioned, which actually I'm quite happy about, but I feel a lot of people are unacknowledged. But the other problem was that if you design for Linotype, the fonts would not work with a Monotype machine or any other machine, so that you were stuck into particular systems. And so I think it's wonderful that the tools that have happened, what has happened has been phenomenal. And I think the opportunities for designers, that they don't have to embed themselves with particular large foundries or small foundries, there is a choice, or they can work individually. I think that has changed a great deal. And also the software that we were struggling to develop 20 years ago or whatever for positioning of matras, etc., now is embedded within the font itself, and you can make choices. There are still choices that I fight for that I feel we could have done with the software, like deciding where we want the ref in certain compositions that now I don't have the choice. But I think that has really opened up the possibilities to really enrich the typographic palette for many, many scripts. And so I think it's a very exciting time now.
And can you share some of your experience on how do you do the font testing and evaluation after the font is designed? What kind of work you do in terms of testing it out and evaluating it? For example, do you do any of those visual ergonomics tests like eye movement recorder tests or things like that?
Well, at Linotype, there used to be two kinds of tests that we would do. So I would do tests, which I still do now, but there would be also, you can believe it, for newspaper composition, there would also be someone testing the machine to see how many characters a minute or characters a second it would spit out. So that was very important for them for speed. So a lot of the work I also did was font specifications and the layout, so it could operate very fast. Now for testing, I'm still very analog. So I print a lot and I do a huge number of tests. So you saw a tiny bit of the Adobe Devanagari one, and that will go on for 50 pages. I will test every subscript with and superscript with every character. I will do spacing tests. I will do tests with all kinds of modifiers, with punctuation, yeah, copious testing. And I think that the fitting of the typeface is extremely important, and particularly as I design for text typefaces, it is very important. And I remember going to, I was in Mumbai many years ago, and there was someone who wouldn't believe me that at Linotype, which I was still then at, that we didn't have an algorithm for spacing. And in fact, I have one PhD student who now is working on a new version of whether it's possible for Latin. But I do think it's really important, the spacing, the space, the white that surrounds and is enclosed within the character is as important as the black. And so, spacing takes a lot of time, but when you get it right with the first 10 or 20 characters, then that will just set up the pattern very well. So I test on different printers, I test on screen, but because I am I'm still using FontLab for testing, and I'm still using an old version that prints. So FontLab people, please hear me, because the newer one won't print. But what's wonderful, why I like to test straight from the font, is I know that there's not a problem with InDesign or any other layout software. If there is a problem, it's our problem, and we have to fix the font.
Exactly.
It's a design problem. It's not something that's happening with layout software. And with working on the Murty with Ratna, we did a lot of tests with InDesign as well, because that was what was going to be used. But we also did tests in Microsoft Word, which the translators might have used. So there were different means of testing. Yeah.
And you are one of the few designers who are into academics also. So I really, many of your students are attending today's session, and I have taught many of my students also, and you have a very large number of student fan following.
Oh, that's very kind.
So can you share your experiences in the academics side?
Yes, I sort of fell into that, really. I had always appreciated research-based practice. And in fact, I started, as I mentioned earlier, I started as a researcher And the reason I got into, I ended up taking over the drawing office very reluctantly at Linotype was because we were embarking on the Bengali digital fonts, and there was talk of just converting the Linotype hot metal, and I was very opinionated, and so was Dr. Tarapada Mukherjee, and we said, no, you can't do this. And so I then started working and looking at the designs and finding that with Tim Holloway, there was a designer who could put into practice, could visibly actually execute my vision, and with information from Tarapada Mukherjee and from the Sarkar brothers. And so, you know, I took that role on, and then at Linotype, I started introducing once a week seminars on Indian orthography, because I said, you can't, you know, you can't design unless you know what you're doing. And we had wonderful colleagues at Linotype India. And they would say to me, what do you need? And I'd say, I need to know what the character set is that they're using. I need to see examples of newspapers. So we had all this pooling of skills, this pooling of information. And I always, for some reason or other, after finishing my PhD, which I did whilst at Linotype, I decided I would publish my findings because there wasn't enough literature in this field.
Yeah.
It was either printing history like Priolka, which was, you know, great. Nike was the best, but there wasn't enough to support other, you know, work practitioners or historians. And so, and then Reading University said, would you come and give some talks here on academic writing? And, you know, so I ended up doing that. And then Jerry Leonidas, the head of the type design course, said, you know, you've done a lot of practice, what about giving feedback? And, but I do think we've had some excellent students from you. I will say that we've had some wonderful students.
We are
And
honored to hear that.
well, I'm delighted they're still happy to work with me, and I love to see their progress, and they have done excellent work, and they come, a lot of them come from a design background, which is the opposite to me. So we feed, you know, them with archives and archival material to enrich their knowledge, and they can take it on from there. But I feel that it is wonderful to see younger people progress and become extremely accomplished designers, and I'm very, very pleased to have been just a part of that.
What is the design methodology you follow? Every font designer has their own design methodology. I have met many youngsters who right away, you know, start everything on the digital platform. But there are some font designers who prefer to do everything by hand. Like Frutiger used to do that, and unless he is very happy with the hand-drawn image, he won't allow them to scan it. And so everyone has their own methodology of design. So what kind of a method or thing you follow?
Well, what I would like to say actually on that is also particularly for students I teach, I feel it's really important that they find their own best method. So for me, it doesn't matter whether they, you know, some will start sketching or some will start with calligraphy because they need to find how the pen moves and to think about the tool itself and execute the design. Others will go straight on to their tablet. To me, it's whatever they like. But the other thing I think is really important as an educator is that working with people who produce designs, students who produce designs, is very different in the educational field to the studio. And I feel myself that it's really important that we don't act as if we're a studio. So much to the possible annoyance of students at the beginning, I try not tell them what to do, but I ask them why they're doing things. And I also say, I don't actually have to like what you do. I just think whatever you do, it needs to be the best that you can do. And so I feel it's very important that they find a voice. So I'm very keen that when any of these scripts that have been produced by our students to a level that's probably when they leave is just below professional, and then they can then develop, but they've found their own voice, and you can't say, oh, that's a Reading style. Probably the way they talk about their design and what's underpinned their design will be possibly a Reading style, but otherwise it's they found their voice and they can experiment, they can try out things. I'm very analog, and you know, I work, I collaborate, and so the designs that I did with Tim Holloway, he would do the lettering, I would sketch. I won't show anyone my sketches except the person, you know, or I might annotate sketches. He would always work on paper. I know that Neelakash sometimes does it straight on the screen. I don't inquire, but for me, I like to be able to look at things on paper and different sizes, and you can see my board
Yeah,
behind.
I can see that. It's very nice to see that in the background.
It inspires me.
Can you share your experience with that Malayalam font you had designed in the late 70s? Even today, it is considered to be the most popular body copy font in Malayalam.
Well, actually, it's a pleasure to talk about that, because it was actually 1983,
83.
and I was told by Linotype, you're going to India next week. And I said, no, I can't go to India next week. And they said, why not? And I said, I'm getting married. And they said, who are you marrying? And I said, well, Rod, you know, you know. Oh, well, take him with you. So we were there on our honeymoon, but working. And it was the first time that Rod had understood what I did, because he came to the meetings. And Malayalam and Manorama were really welcoming.
Yeah.
And they it was during Diwali, so they give us a car, and they're very popular, obviously, so that we kept being offered tea and sorts, but anywhere we stopped, and they sent us to Tekadi Park for the weekend. But I sat down with them and said, what would you like to do? And I explained the phonetic keyboard to them, which they really liked. But we talked. It was wonderful, because I was there 5 days speaking with them, asking them about their designs. And what I found particularly interesting talking with them was the fact that I said, I can't make sense of the thick, thin stroke contrast.
Yeah.
If you use a pen, it doesn't quite work out the way that some of these display fonts work. Do you want to correct this? Says, no. This is really important. This you need to adhere to. And then I said, what about the vowel signs that were put on stalks for hot metal in case they break? Do you want them attached? And they said, we're not too worried about that. We're more concerned about the stroke modulation and etc. And so I had wonderful input. And so and then again we did a lot of testing, but it was a real pleasure to sort of work directly with the typographers. We talked about also justification issues, what word could break, what not, you know, where the vowels, the modifier mark should be. So it was very clear to us what they wanted. And then like I still work the same way today, is, you know, we send samples, you know, send 10 characters, 7 characters or 10 characters and say, you know, please give us feedback. This is what we propose to you. And then that will be the DNA, if you like, for the rest of the character set. And with ABP, we sent 3 characters. Okay. When we did the Bengali, the Linotype Bengali, we sent 3 characters. We sent the ka. I always start with ka, it's auspicious. It's always the first character. It's very frequent as well, but and then the aka and the ba for Bengali. And I said, we're proposing these changes because the structure of the Linotype just was, terrible. And they said, yes, please go ahead. And that gave us license to alter all the characters. because it was, you know, the DNA. And so it was with the Malaya Manorama, and yeah, it was a pleasure working there, and yeah, and witnessing their changeover to the digital fonts. But thank you for your comment.
It has withstood the passage of time, and after so many years to even today, I think all the magazines I have designed in Malayalam and all the books I have designed in Malayalam use the same font. And it is very popular with all designers as well as readers.
But I would like it to encourage new designs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I think, and I think that can happen now.
Yeah. I will just read out some of the comments from the audience. So many of your students are here. So Kimia Gandhi says, hello, Fiona. Lovely to see you. So Muthu Nedamaran says, thank you, Fiona. Good to hear you again. Sridhar Murty also is saying, thank you, Fiona, for the wonderful talk. Abhijit Gupta. Suman Bhandari. And Seema Kamdar saying, a trendsetter, so lively to design. Listen to her. That is my wife giving a comment. And then NN Designs and Research. Thank you, Fiona. This is great motivation to carry forward Gurumukhi type design. Thank you for sharing your suggestions. Ratna Ramanathan saying, great to see such a generous presentation, Fiona. Sridhar Murthy, please also talk about Telugu.
Telugu, well, I spent some time at Inadu and again, it was talking about what kind of stroke modulation is wanted, because we knew that the manuscripts were quite light, and we knew that the tendency was not to be as strong as the Kannada, not such a high contrast.
Yeah.
And we also knew that we were very conscious of the word count for the newspaper, how many words to the line could be achieved within the columns as well, because in fact you'll be able to tell, say whether this is true or not, but as far as I remember, up till the 70s there was still rationing of newsprint in India.
Yes, yeah.
So you know, we were very conscious of how tight we could get it that was still readable, and Telugu words, as we found in the Murty design, are actually quite long, and so it was important to look at that. So we looked at a foundry type that was particularly liked. We were also very aware that the monotype, which was much better than the linotype hot metal, there was a hot metal, I can't remember the linotype one, but the monotype one, the problem was to avoid type breakage. They'd made some of the subscripts very large because they were worried about that. So I spent at least a week in Hyderabad, I think, and also working with typographers, one of the calligraphers, I think he was doing the heading typefaces. And yeah, so we did a lot of testing. The phonetic keyboard was really important for that. So we had, because up to then they'd have these huge keyboards, which were very expensive and custom made. And we introduced the phonetic keyboard. So I do remember the figures. I remember we had 90 characters, including Latin punctuation, on this phonetic keyboard. And you just had characters of the syllabary and some extra modifiers and ligatures like Shri.
Yeah.
And then with those, and then in the font, we only had 360 characters. And with that, I tested 19,000 combinations per weight.
My goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really a long process.
The fitting, we had to introduce certain routines to fit the spacing of the kerning vowel signs, and then if they had the other ones that went underneath the zero width ones, so that there was, you know, but yeah, it fitted well. The fitting for Telugu is yeah, very important. I usually show that if I'm talking about fitting, I usually show Telugu.
Because the excite has to be compromised a lot because of the matras coming on top as well as at the bottom.
Yeah.
You're another student of yours, Pooja Saxena, has written, so wonderful to see you, Fiona. And thank you for sharing all those stories with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have come to the conclusion of the session. I will just take a minute to share the screen and to thank the all our partners.
Yes,
Just
please.
give me a minute. Yeah. So I would like to thank my colleagues in the organizing team, Tarundeep Girdhar, Dr. Uday Kumar and Chirag Gandhar. And I would like to thank the HasGeek team for all the technical support and your wonderful help for us for the live streaming and all the publicity. And Typography Society would like to thank Dr. Fiona Ross for accepting our invitation and all everybody who has participated in this. Thank
Well,
you very much.
I feel truly honoured to be invited, to have been invited.
Same here. We are all very happy to have you as our speaker. We learned a lot.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you.